I arrived in England in 1960, coming from South Africa. And then by 1961, I figured out that I wanted to be an engineer and got my start in the business recording mono at Advision Sound Studios on 83 New Bond Street. I was very fortunate when I was brought up in South Africa. I got a great musical education. I studied classical piano from the age of about 4 till I left South Africa and when I was about 18. And I think being a musician first, then deciding to become an engineer when I arrived in London, that was the big step that I made. When I first started in the business, I was really struggling to establish who I was and get a technique, which I didn't really know much about because I was never really a technologically advanced kind of person. My background being the musical side of things, I had to pick up the techniques as I went along. And as I grew into the business, I gradually started to find my feet. And it wasn't for quite a few years, I think, right until about 66. So there's a good 5-year period of me learning the ropes and actually struggling quite a bit because there were no schools of engineering. So I had to learn by observation. I was quite aware of Jimi Hendrix, and one could not pick up a newspaper, a Melody Maker or a New Musical Express without seeing pictures of Jimi Hendrix. He had arrived in England in 1966, in the autumn of 66, and I was working at Olympic Studios, at the old studios, before we moved it to the new facility in Barnes. And when the studio opened in January of 67, he was one of the first clients to walk in the door with Chas Chandler. And I'd been fairly well conscious of who he was. I mean, he had had the hit Hey Joe, and he became one of our brand new clients. Recording Jimi Hendrix in the beginning was a real challenge because one had to deal with big Marshall amps, sometimes cranked, sometimes not, a 3-piece band, and we only had 4 tracks in which to record it. So the initial stages of Are You Experienced were mono drums, mono guitar, the bass and a vocal, and then we did a 4-to-4, mixing it from one 4-track machine to another. So we were developing our techniques as we went along, and we were experimenting all the time. It was a situation where it didn't matter what we did. If I twiddled a couple of knobs and made something sound weird, and it was thought, wow, that's cool, let's do that. Because there were no rules. And in fact, Chas Chandler had this wonderful phrase. He said, the rules are, there are no rules. Chas Chandler was Jimi Hendrix's producer. And he was largely instrumental in helping Jimi develop his songs and helping him perform in the studio so that when Jimi played the guitar, he felt relaxed. My job was to capture the sounds. And Chas kind of left that up to me, and then Jimi and I sort of got into it. It was always a challenge because Jimi would go out in the studio and do something with the amp, and I'd run in and have a listen. Then I'd run up to the control room, do some fast twiddling of knobs and put some reverb, some compression, some EQ on. And then he would come in and have a listen. Oh, yeah, all right. Then he would run down into the studio, and it was like we kept upping the ante. The way we recorded Jimi Hendrix was fairly aggressive in the sense that I got all the sounds as he was playing, the EQ, the compression, the reverb. It was all printed as we were going to tape. So you had to get everything immediately. You couldn't wait till afterwards because each part of the step, as you went down the chain, you would be going 4 tracks, and then you bounce it to the other 2 of the other 4 machine, and then you'd have to have that mix exactly right because it affected everything you did down the line. Jimi Hendrix went to America in 1968, and I followed a few months later. And what we had was we completely missed 8-track. We jumped straight to 12-track, which was actually kind of a very noisy part solution because 16-track was going to follow it. But since we skipped the 8-track, Jimi comes into the Record Plant Studios in New York City, and now instead of having 4, he's got 12 tracks, and he went nuts. Oh, wow, extra tracks. Woo! So, of course, we're just layering on extra guitars, extra vocals, and it was really, it was freeing him more than it was constricting him. Well, the reaction to Jimi's first album, I think, was universal applause. It contained the hit "Hey Joe," but it was just this raw energy with Purple Haze and Foxy Lady and all these incredible tracks. The public went mad. It was universally acclaimed. I mean, he just burst upon the scene, and from that point on, people just recognized him as being the greatest guitar player of all time. When he played the guitar, there was a unified body of work. It's the guitar, the hands, the heart, the brain. It all became one. And then when he played a chord or played a solo, it was so telling and so vibrant and so unusual, and that people just were attracted to it. How we were able to create Jimi's sounds with very little gear was because we were forced into it. We were so starved for effects. Or what did we have? We had tape delay, we had compression, we had EQ, we had reverb, and we had to just tweak those things to make them as imaginative as possible. For instance, if we wanted something to warble, to go like blah, 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 we would put outsized pieces of tape on the capstan of the tape machine, and when the tape was played and recorded, it would just wobble back and forth. If we wanted to have phasing, we would just use multiple tape machines to create this incredible phasing effect, which incidentally we got from George Martin, but that's another story. We were able to use American compressors that were designed for mastering, so that when we used a Fairchild compressor in stereo, it just thumped and pumped in sequence with the music. And reverb, which really hadn't been used to the extent that we did it with, we would change the delay by making it 7.5 or 15 or any speed in between, just because we could create a different scenic landscape in sound. And that's how I think of Jimi's sounds. It's a big stereophonic painting. Working with Zeppelin was a different kind of a challenge, because here was a band that was a four-piece, had an amazing singer, an incredible drummer, a really powerful guitar player, and of course the bass player, John Paul Jones, had this symphonic background because he was a classically trained musician. So the soundscape was bigger, certainly heavier. That's for sure. I mean, Zeppelin is known for their heaviness and also their delicateness. And there's an interesting parallel between their dynamics and what Jimi Hendrix would do and what Zeppelin would do. 8 tracks for the most part, and then later on 16. The consoles had been improved, more sophisticated styles of engineering. Different kinds of challenges, because the songs were very long and quite complex with the vocal arrangements. I don't think the advent of the new digital gear in the early 70s took away. I think it just gave me extra ammunition. I was always looking for bits and pieces of gear to make my work more effective, give me a bit of more of a tone color to work with. I embraced all the new technology whenever it came out.